The galaxy was a place of untold wonder, where humans had once been the underdogs in the great expanse of the universe. They had made their mark not through sheer might, but through their adaptability and fierce will to survive. Their empire, born from the ashes of a brutal interstellar war, had risen to prominence. But even the brightest stars cast long shadows, and beneath the glittering surface of their success, a storm was brewing. Captain Riker Tanis stood at the observation window aboard the Elysium's edge, watching as the distant stars twinkled coldly in the void. The war had ended a decade ago, but the scars it had left on him and his crew were still fresh. He had led countless missions in the service of the Galactic Human Republic, his reputation solidified as a no-nonsense leader who could get the job done. Yet something had changed in recent months. A creeping unease had settled over him, a sensation that something was off, though he couldn't quite put his finger on it. "Captain," a voice interrupted his thoughts. It was Commander Liana Voss, his right hand, and the most trusted member of his crew. "We've received a priority transmission from the High Command." Riker nodded, turning away from the window. His mind had been on other matters, but he couldn't ignore a direct call from the upper echelons of the Republic. "Put it through," he said. Liana activated the holocom, and the image of General Torek appeared, his stern features flickering to life. The general's reputation for hardline tactics was well known, and his presence on the screen did little to ease Riker's growing sense of discomfort. "Captain Tanis, I trust this message finds you well?" Torek's voice was businesslike, yet there was an edge to it that Riker didn't like. "I'm well enough, General," Riker replied, standing a little straighter. "What's the situation?" Torek's gaze hardened. "There's been a breach in the outer colony sector. We've lost contact with the station at Gliese 581G. Your ship is closest to the region. I need you to investigate. Report back with whatever you find. It's critical." Riker frowned. Gliese 581G wasn't an ordinary colony. It had been a beacon of human ingenuity and progress in an otherwise unstable part of the galaxy. Its sudden silence could mean only one thing. Something catastrophic had happened. "We'll head out immediately, General," Riker said, his voice steady but his mind racing. "Good," Torek replied, his tone softening for a brief moment. "I expect a full report. Don't fail me, Captain." The transmission ended, and the room fell silent. Riker's eyes flicked to Liana, who was already looking at him with concern. "Something's off," she said quietly. "I know," Riker muttered, "but we don't have a choice. We have to go." As the Elysium's edge set course for Gliese 581G, Riker couldn't shake the feeling that the mission was more than it appeared. His instincts, honed over years of experience, screamed at him that something was wrong. The general's words had been too pointed, too controlled. There was more to this breach than just a lost colony. A gnawing suspicion crept into his mind. What if the mission was a trap? But for who? And why? Riker spent the rest of the night pacing the bridge, running through scenarios in his mind. He trusted his crew, but he knew that trust could be a double-edged sword. The silence of Gliese 581G weighed heavily on his thoughts, each passing hour increasing the unease in his gut. The galaxy had changed in the last decade, and so had its players. Allies from the war had turned into shadows, and old enemies had grown silent. And then there was the matter of Liana. She had been by his side for years, and Riker had always considered her a friend, someone who shared his unyielding sense of duty. But even she had her secrets. The thought troubled him more than he cared to admit. By the time they arrived at Gliese 581GS orbit, the first rays of the distant star had begun to break through the station's lifeless expanse. The station itself was silent, a ghost ship in the vastness of space. There was no sign of life, no distress signals, no sign of the bustling colony that had once thrived there. "This isn't right," Liana said, her voice low as she studied the readouts. The station should have been equipped with backup systems. It wouldn't just go dark without a reason. "Prepare a boarding party," Riker ordered, his voice tightening. "We're going in. I want answers." As the team prepared for the descent, Riker couldn't shake the feeling that they were walking into a trap. And worse, he couldn't ignore the deep, unsettling thought that perhaps it was one they had been lured into. The Elysium's edge hovered above Gliese, 581 GS, abandoned station, like a predator circling its prey. Riker stood at the front of the landing bay, his mind churning with thoughts of the unknown. His crew had been through a lot, but this felt different. The hair-raising silence that surrounded them in orbit was unnerving. Every system on the station had gone offline without warning, a complete shutdown. It was almost as if something or someone had deliberately erased the station from existence. "Captain," Liana's voice cut through his thoughts. She stood beside him, her eyes scanning the reports that blinked on her datapad. "The atmosphere inside the station is stable, but the power grid is completely offline. We'll have to rely on our emergency power when we board." "Understood," Riker replied, though his voice was laced with tension. "Are the others ready?" "Boarding parties prepared and standing by," she said. "I'll lead the team on the surface, but you should stay in the command seat and keep watch." "Something doesn't feel right." He nodded. His instincts told him that this wasn't going to be a simple recon mission. No one could anticipate what they were about to uncover. The transport shuttle descended toward the docking bay of the station, its lights cutting through the inky darkness. As the shuttle touched down with a soft thud, Riker's pulse quickened. The hatch opened, releasing a hiss of compressed air. The crew stepped out into the eerie, abandoned docking bay. The faint glow of emergency lights barely illuminated the area, casting long, distorted shadows across the metal walls. The hum of the ship's life support systems was the only sound, a strange, mechanical lullaby that filled the space. Riker was the first to move, his boots clicking sharply against the cold, metallic floor. His crew followed in tight formation, weapons drawn but ready. Liana was at his side, her face a mask of concentration. "Nothing's been disturbed," she murmured, her voice low. "No signs of a struggle, no blood." "That's what worries me," Riker said, his hand gripping the hilt of his blaster. "No signs of life at all." The crew moved through the station, navigating its labyrinthine halls. The air smelled stale, as though it had been trapped here for far too long. As they passed by abandoned offices and empty laboratories, it was clear the colony had been thriving before the silence had taken hold. Equipment lay half-assembled, papers scattered across desks, and food wrappers sat on countertops, traces of a life that had been abruptly halted. They reached the central command room, its steel door still shut. Riker motioned for Liana to take the lead. She expertly sliced through the electronic lock, and with a soft click, the door opened. Inside, the room was pitch black. A single emergency light flickered faintly in the corner, casting long, eerie shadows across the terminal banks. At the center of the room stood the station's command console, dark and lifeless. The silence in the room was stifling, thick with an unnerving weight. Liana stepped forward, tapping the controls on the console. The screen flickered to life, casting a faint glow on her face. Riker moved to her side, his eyes narrowing as the data began to stream across the screen. "Strange," she muttered. "It's like someone's been trying to hide something. These logs, they don't make sense." "What do you mean?" Riker asked, stepping closer. "There are gaps in the records," she explained, her voice tinged with suspicion. "Almost like someone deliberately erased certain entries." Riker's gut twisted. Someone didn't just abandon this place. They were trying to cover their tracks. Before Liana could respond, a loud bang echoed through the station, followed by the shriek of twisting metal. The whole room shuddered, and an alarm blared to life, its shrill sound cutting through the tension like a knife. "Ambush!" Riker barked. "Get to cover." In an instant, the crew scattered, weapons raised. The lights flickered, and the station's internal alarms blared louder. The hairs on the back of Riker's neck stood on end. This wasn't just a power failure. This was an attack. He turned to Liana, but her face was pale as she looked back at the console. "Captain, this doesn't make sense. These aren't random errors. They're too deliberate. Whoever's behind this wants us to find something," Riker said grimly, his voice low. "And I think we've just walked right into their trap." Before they could react, the door to the command room slammed shut with a deafening clang, trapping them inside. The station was no longer a dead ghost. It had become a living, hostile force, and Riker had no idea who or what was pulling the strings. "Brace yourselves," Riker muttered, his eyes scanning the room for any signs of movement. This is just the beginning. The game had changed. And now the hunt was on. The walls of the command room seemed to close in as the door locked with a final, resounding click. The blaring alarms echoed through the station, a constant reminder that whatever was happening wasn't just an accident. It was an orchestrated move. Riker's instincts screamed at him to act, but caution weighed heavy in his mind. They were trapped. The station had gone from abandoned to hostile in mere seconds, and they hadn't even begun to understand what they were up against. Liana slammed her fist against the locked door. "Damn it, this wasn't supposed to happen. We were supposed to be in and out." "We need to find another way out," Riker said, his voice sharp. "No use in wasting time on the door. Keep your heads on a swivel, everyone." He motioned for his crew to spread out. The team moved methodically, searching for any weak points in the command room. The emergency lights flickered sporadically, casting haunting shadows along the walls. Each corner seemed to harbor something just out of sight, something waiting. The air grew heavy, charged with the tension of uncertainty. Liana, her face tense with focus, approached one of the terminal consoles. "There's something odd about the security logs," she murmured, tapping rapidly on the screen. "The last few entries, they don't just show a sudden shutdown. They show a series of unauthorized access points, as if someone from inside the station was redirecting the data." Riker's mind raced. So, it wasn't just a power failure. Someone here wanted the station to disappear, and now they're covering their tracks. Who could have done this? Liana's eyes flicked back to the screen. Whoever it was, they knew exactly how to hide their movements. They've erased everything, except for these gaps, which don't line up. Riker's gut tightened. "Keep digging. We need to find out exactly what was going on here before the blackout. We might be walking right into a conspiracy." The ship's comms buzzed, startling everyone. It was Lieutenant Kale, their weapons officer. "Captain." Kale's voice crackled through the static. "Something's moving on the lower levels of the station. We're hearing noises. Lots of it. It doesn't feel like we're alone." Riker's grip tightened on his weapon. "Keep your distance, Lieutenant. Don't engage unless you have to. We'll find out what's going on, but we need to stay coordinated." Liana's eyes narrowed. Could it be survivors? "No way," Riker replied, his tone grim. "Not with the way the station's been sealed off. Whatever's moving down there isn't human." The crew moved carefully through the dark corridors, the pulse of the alarms still reverberating in their bones. Every sound seemed to echo, stretching the tension thinner. Riker's senses were heightened, but the absence of clear danger only made the situation worse. It was the unknown that gnawed at him. As they ventured deeper into the station, they passed a mess hall, its doors hanging slightly ajar, as if someone had left in a hurry. Riker motioned for the team to halt. He slowly approached the doorway, peering inside. There was no sign of movement. The long tables were overturned, food containers half open. But it was the faint, blood-stained handprint on one of the tables that caught his attention. It was too deliberate to be an accident. Someone had left it there on purpose, someone trying to signal something, or someone trying to erase their tracks. "Look at this," Riker whispered to Liana, who stepped forward to inspect it. "This is recent," she said, her face pale. "Someone was here, Captain. They're still here, watching us." Riker's heart rate spiked. "We need to stay sharp. Let's move." As they advanced, a sudden crash reverberated through the station. The sound was metallic, violent. The floor vibrated beneath their feet, and Riker's pulse quickened. They turned a corner to find an enormous security door, completely torn off its hinges. A trail of blood smeared the floor, leading toward the lower levels of the station. Riker signaled for his team to fan out, keeping their weapons raised. But as they advanced further, the atmosphere grew even colder. The emergency lights buzzed and flickered, casting strange, shifting shadows that seemed to move on their own. And then they saw it. At the far end of the hallway stood a figure, shrouded in darkness. It was too still, too silent to be human. As they moved closer, the figure's head slowly turned toward them, its hollow eyes glowing faintly in the dim light. "Everyone get back," Riker shouted, his voice harsh. But before anyone could react, the figure dissolved into the shadows, vanishing without a trace. "What the hell was that?" one of the crew members whispered, their voice trembling. Riker's mind raced. There was something fundamentally wrong with this station, something beyond just a sabotage. Whatever that thing was, it wasn't a survivor. It wasn't human. "We're not alone here," Riker said, voice tight with barely contained fear. "And whatever that was, it's not just after us. It's after something else." Liana turned to him, her face pale. "What are you saying, Captain? What's it after?" Riker's gaze darkened. "I think we've stumbled onto something much bigger than just a lost station. Someone or something doesn't want us to find out what happened here. And we're about to learn why." The hunt had just begun, but now Riker wasn't just searching for answers. He was searching for a way to. The darkness seemed to cling to the walls, as if it had a life of its own. Every step Riker and his crew took seemed to stir the air in strange, unsettling ways. The deeper they ventured into the station, the more the eerie quiet weighed on them. The shadowy figure they'd seen earlier had vanished into thin air, leaving behind only the oppressive silence and the increasing tension in their hearts. "What the hell was that?" Liana muttered again, her breath steady but her eyes darting around, alert to every creak and groan of the station. "Some kind of alien?" "I don't think so," Riker replied, his voice low, weighed down by the uncertainty gnawing at him. "That thing didn't move like anything I've ever seen. It wasn't human, not even remotely." A soft buzzing sound interrupted their conversation, a noise Riker had learned to associate with a malfunctioning terminal. He motioned for Liana to check it out. They approached a small console embedded into the wall, its screen flickering to life. But as Liana began to hack into the system, Riker's eyes were fixed on the trail of blood leading deeper into the station's belly. Whoever had been here before them had left a bloody path for a reason. But why? The feeling in his gut grew stronger with each passing second. This wasn't just an investigation anymore. It was a hunt. And someone or something was hunting them. "Got it," Liana said with a grunt of triumph. The screen in front of her pulsed with life, a trail of encrypted data spilling out in front of them. She squinted at the lines, her fingers flying over the terminal. "It's buried deep, but there's something here. Someone was trying to access something important, and they didn't want anyone to know." "What do you mean?" Riker asked, stepping closer to her, trying to get a glimpse of the screen. Liana hesitated, her brow furrowing. "The last set of data entries, they don't belong to anyone I've seen before. These IDs are all falsified. But the real kicker? They match the security protocols for the station's deepest sectors. The restricted areas. The ones that even the highest-ranking officers would need clearance for." Riker's blood ran cold. "You're saying someone with inside knowledge erased everything and locked themselves in there?" "Exactly," Liana said, backing away from the terminal as the screen flickered again. "And whatever they were protecting, whatever they were hiding, could be right under our feet." "Let's go," Riker said, his voice hard. "We need to get down there." The deeper they went, the more unstable the station seemed to become. The lights flickered intermittently, casting brief moments of clarity in the midst of the surrounding gloom. The hallways stretched on endlessly, their emptiness maddening. As they neared the lower levels, a growing sense of dread filled the air. The temperature dropped, and the hum of the life support systems became more distant, replaced by an oppressive silence. The crew's breaths were visible, sharp clouds of vapor forming in the frozen air. "We're getting close," Riker muttered, his voice barely above a whisper. He could feel it, the tension thick enough to cut through. "Stay close, watch each other's backs." They came to a large, reinforced door, the kind that was only found on high-security areas. The metal was pitted, scarred from years of neglect. Riker motioned for Liana to hack it, but as she approached, the door suddenly slid open on its own with an ominous hiss. For a moment, the crew just stood there, unsure of whether they had triggered a trap. The door revealed nothing but an empty hallway bathed in eerie green light. But the air felt different here, heavier, charged with something more than just cold. Liana stepped forward, her fingers tight around her weapon. "I don't like this, Captain." "Stay sharp," Riker ordered. He turned to the others. "Form a line. We move quickly. We don't know what's down there." They moved cautiously, weapons raised. The hallway seemed to stretch forever, winding deeper into the heart of the station. The low hum of machinery grew louder, and as they passed through another set of doors, they found themselves in a cavernous chamber. It was the heart of the station. Inside, the room was filled with rows of tanks, each one containing strange, translucent substances, gel-like masses suspended in the liquid. Riker's eyes widened. It wasn't just the sheer scale of the room that unnerved him, but the sheer wrongness of it all. These tanks weren't for storing anything normal. The contents inside were alive. Liana's voice broke the silence. "Captain, what the hell is this?" Riker didn't answer. He just moved forward, his heart pounding in his chest. Each tank contained something alien, something otherworldly. Shapes shifted inside the liquid, forms that could have been creatures, but they weren't quite anything he could recognize. They were still waiting. "Are these experiments?" one of the crew members asked, his voice tight with fear. Riker nodded slowly, his mind reeling with the implications. "Looks like it. But why here? What's the connection to Gliese 581G? Before he could say more, a low groan vibrated through the walls of the chamber. The crew froze. The tanks began to shake, the liquid inside rippling. A mechanical whirring filled the air. And then one by one, the tanks began to hiss open, releasing a thick, noxious vapor. Liana stepped back, her eyes wide. "We need to get out. Now." But it was too late. A low, guttural growl reverberated through the chamber, and Riker spun toward the source of the sound. Emerging from the mist, figures began to take shape, creatures, humanoid in form, but their faces were twisted, unrecognizable, covered in shifting masses of flesh and tendrils. Their eyes were hollow, vacant, yet filled with an unnatural hunger. And they were coming for them. "Move now," Riker yelled, his voice sharp with urgency. The hunt had just escalated, and they were no longer just fighting for answers. They were fighting to survive. The creatures that emerged from the mist were like nightmares come to life, their forms twisted and fluid, as though their very existence was an aberration. Their flesh writhed beneath translucent skin, and their glowing, vacant eyes locked onto Riker and his crew with chilling intent. They didn't make a sound as they moved, but their presence filled the room with a palpable menace. "Get to cover," Riker roared, his voice cutting through the tension like a blade. He didn't wait for the others to react. He moved first, his instincts taking over as he sprinted toward the nearest wall. Liana was right behind him, her face a mix of fear and determination. "We've got to fight back. These things, they're not just going to stop." Riker nodded, pulling his blaster from its holster and firing at the closest creature. The bolt hit, but the creature barely flinched. The flesh on its torso seemed to absorb the shot before it continued its relentless march toward them, its twisted mouth opening wide in what could only be described as an otherworldly screech. "Captain, the tanks," Liana shouted, her eyes darting to the rows of tanks around them. "If we destroy the tanks, we might stop them from coming." Riker's eyes narrowed. "It's a risk, but we don't have much of a choice." Without another word, they turned and began running toward the far side of the chamber, blasting at the creatures as they went. The shots rang out, but the monsters seemed to move too quickly, almost inhumanly fast. The blasters didn't seem to slow them down, and the air was thick with the smell of burning flesh as they pressed forward. One of Riker's crew members, Private Delos, fired at a creature's leg, but the shot went wide. The creature leapt, its claws slashing out like razors. Delos was knocked to the ground, the creature pinning him with terrifying strength. "No!" Liana screamed, rushing forward to help him. But before she could reach him, another creature appeared out of the shadows, blocking her path. "Liana, get back!" Riker shouted, but it was too late. The creature lunged at Liana, its claws scraping the floor as it moved faster than anything human could. She twisted, barely dodging its attack, but her blaster shot grazed the creature's side, causing it to hiss in pain. The creature staggered back, but only momentarily. It was still coming. Riker fired another round, striking the creature in its chest, but it kept coming. "This isn't working," he shouted, his heart hammering in his chest. "We need to destroy those tanks." He pivoted and made a beeline for the nearest row of tanks. The creatures, sensing their movement, started to advance more quickly, their grotesque bodies squirming and rippling in anticipation. They were fast, far faster than anything Riker had encountered in all his years of service. Liana, still behind him, fired at the tank nearest to Riker. Her shot missed the mark, ricocheting off the glass. "The glass is too thick. Keep moving," Riker yelled. "We can't let them catch us here." The creatures surged forward, closing the gap. Riker felt the first one's claws slice through his jacket, narrowly missing his skin. He spun, firing his blaster point-blank at the creature's face. It recoiled, but only for a second before charging again. "Liana!" Riker screamed. "On it!" She darted past him, her weapon blazing. She hit the control panel for the tanks, and for a moment, nothing happened. Then, with a low mechanical groan, the tanks began to rattle and shake. A moment of hope flickered within him, but then the tanks began to explode. The first blast was deafening, followed by a chain reaction. The room shook as the tanks ruptured, sending geysers of strange liquid and broken glass everywhere. A thick, acrid vapor filled the air. But the creatures didn't stop. They were feeding on the chaos. As one tank exploded, another creature emerged from its shattered remains, its body writhing in a grotesque parody of life. Riker's pulse raced as he dove for cover behind a column, narrowly missing a claw that swung through the air. The air was thick with smoke, and the sound of explosions drowned out all else. But Riker couldn't stop. He had to make sure his team was still alive. His eyes scanned the room, and he saw Liana ducking behind a pillar, trying to line up another shot. "Liana," he shouted, "we need to get to the elevator. Now." But the creatures were too numerous, and they were closing in. Riker's crew was pinned down on both sides, struggling to stay alive in the chaos. Delos had vanished in the crowd of creatures, and the others were just holding on. "We need a plan," Liana shouted, struggling to reload her blaster. Riker gritted his teeth. "We fall back to the elevator. We can regroup, then figure out how to take these things down." Liana hesitated, but then nodded. They were running out of time. "Go," Riker yelled, and together they pushed forward, weapons raised. The creatures pursued, their low growls becoming a twisted chorus as they began to close in. But just as Riker reached the elevator doors, the ground trembled again, and a loud, unmistakable crash echoed from above. A voice crackled through the comms, strained and panicked. It was Lieutenant Kale. "Captain, we've got a bigger problem. There's something moving on the upper levels. It's not just the creatures, there's something else." Riker's blood ran cold. The hunt was far from over, and now something even worse was coming for them. "Hold the line," Riker shouted, his voice filled with urgency. "We're not leaving until we have answers. Everyone, get to the elevator now." The doors slid open with a mechanical hiss, but they weren't alone. The creatures were already there, and something even darker was lurking behind them. "Get in," Riker yelled, shoving Liana and the others into the elevator as the first of the creatures lunged forward. The doors slammed shut just in time, but the question remained. What had they unleashed on this station, and how much worse was it about to get? The elevator groaned under the weight of their frantic escape. Riker's fingers tightened around his blaster as the creatures slammed against the doors with a ferocity that made the metal rattle. Every second felt like an eternity as they descended deeper into the station's lower levels, the rumbling of the creatures' relentless pursuit echoing in their ears. Liana's breath came in quick bursts. "We've got to get out of here. What the hell is going on?" Her voice was strained, and Riker could hear the panic seeping through her calm exterior. "We don't have answers yet," Riker muttered, glancing at the others, making sure everyone was still accounted for. Delos was still missing, but the rest of the crew had made it into the elevator. But we will. We're not just running away. We're going to find out what's behind this. The elevator reached its destination with a harsh clang as the doors slid open. A deep, oppressive silence greeted them. The hallway beyond was dark, only illuminated by the flickering emergency lights. The air smelled stale, like it hadn't been disturbed in years, but Riker knew better. The faint hum of machinery beneath the surface was a reminder that this place was far from abandoned. "Stay sharp," Riker ordered, stepping out into the hallway. "We don't know what's waiting for us here." The crew filed out behind him, weapons raised. As they moved deeper into the shadowy corridor, they came to another large door, one that looked reinforced, its surface scarred by what looked like explosive damage. The door was slightly ajar. Liana raised an eyebrow, her expression tense. "Another damn trap?" "I don't think we're being trapped anymore," Riker said grimly. "I think we're the prey now. But we don't have time to waste. Let's see what's behind this door." With a sharp nod, Liana stepped forward and used her terminal to slice the lock, the door sliding open with a low mechanical whine. Inside, the room was far larger than they expected, an expansive control center, full of terminals and flickering holographic maps. But what caught Riker's eye immediately was the massive display in the center of the room. It was a schematic of the entire station, and, more chillingly, it showed a series of tunnels running beneath it. Liana stepped forward, her fingers flying across the console. "This isn't just a station, this is a lab." Her voice quivered as she spoke, the weight of the realization heavy in the air. These tunnels, they were used for something, and I think whatever it was, it's still down there. Riker's pulse quickened. What are we talking about? What were they experimenting with? Liana scrolled through the data, her eyes widening in horror as she discovered more. The station was never a colony, at least not originally. It was a secret research facility. They were studying alien life forms, trying to adapt them to human physiology. This was supposed to be the next step in human evolution. Riker's mind raced. What could possibly go wrong with experimenting on alien life forms? Was it their work that caused the failure? "What did they create?" he asked, his voice low, his gut twisting in unease. "Something went wrong," Liana said, her eyes glued to the screen. "Something catastrophic. They didn't just study the creatures, they modified them. They were creating hybrid organisms, blending human and alien DNA to create superior soldiers or something even worse. It's all here, hidden in the logs. And this," she gestured to a series of schematics on the screen, "this is what's left of their experiments." Riker felt his stomach turn as he looked at the distorted shapes that flickered on the screen, showing images of beings that resembled humans, but with alien characteristics, grotesque, monstrous things. They were playing God. The thought of what these experiments had unleashed chilled him to the core. And suddenly, it wasn't just about survival anymore. It was about stopping this from happening again. "What happened to the crew?" he asked, his voice almost a whisper. Liana paused. "The logs, they're incomplete. But from what I can see, something broke loose, some kind of failure in the genetic experiments. The creatures we saw earlier, the ones attacking us, they're the result of that. Some kind of evolution gone horribly wrong." Riker clenched his fists. He had feared this. The creatures weren't random. They were the product of madness, a twisted science that had turned on its creators. "We have to stop them. We can't let this spread." Before Liana could respond, the sound of heavy footsteps echoed down the hall, followed by a guttural growl. Riker's heart skipped a beat. "They're here," he muttered. "They found us." From the darkness of the hallway, a figure appeared. But this time, it wasn't just one of the monstrous hybrids. The figure was larger, its form more humanoid, its body seemingly armored in dark, scaly plating. Its eyes glowed with an eerie, unnatural light, and it moved with an intelligence the others lacked. "That's not one of the failed experiments," Liana whispered. "It's something else." The creature's head tilted, and Riker could feel the weight of its gaze. It wasn't a mere beast. This was something else entirely. Something that had evolved beyond the failed experiments. Something dangerous. Without a word, the creature lunged. Its movements were fast, calculated, and it was already upon them before they had a chance to react. Riker fired, but the creature was too quick, dodging the shots with ease, its claws tearing through the air. Retreat. Riker yelled, grabbing Liana by the arm and pulling her back. We need to get out of here. They ran, the creature close behind, its growls filling the air as it pursued them down the narrow corridor. The rest of the crew was close behind, firing blindly as they went, but the creature barely slowed, its body too fast, too powerful. They reached a dead-end corridor, the walls closing in on them. The only option was to turn and face it. Get ready, Riker shouted. But before they could even raise their weapons, a loud crash echoed down the hall. The ceiling above them cracked, and suddenly, the walls trembled. The creature stopped, its head jerking toward the new threat. It growled, but there was something different in its stance. The creature was sensing something. Then, with a horrifying screech, the floor beneath their feet began to tremble. Something larger, far more powerful, was emerging. And Riker realized with a sinking feeling that whatever it wasn't just the station's experiments that had been unleashed. The real horror was yet to come. The walls trembled with a force that sent vibrations deep into Riker's bones. The creature, larger, faster, more intelligent than the others, paused, its glowing eyes flicking toward the ceiling, as if it had sensed something far more dangerous than them. It let out an ear-piercing screech that echoed through the darkened halls, sending a shiver of dread down the spines of Riker and his crew. What the hell is that? Liana breathed, her voice a mixture of disbelief and terror. Riker's eyes narrowed as the ceiling above them cracked again, louder this time. The temperature in the corridor dropped sharply, and the air grew thick with the faintest hint of something metallic, a smell that made his skin crawl. Whatever was coming, it wasn't something that should have been awakened. Without warning, the creature before them lunged at the walls, scratching and clawing at the metal, as if it could sense the impending arrival of whatever was lurking above. Riker's heart skipped a beat. We need to move. Now. The team didn't need to be told twice. They turned on their heels, sprinting down the hallway, their boots slapping against the cold, metal floors. The sounds of claws scraping against metal filled the air, and the creature behind them followed with terrifying speed, its growls now mixed with the shrieking wail of something far larger, far more ominous. They reached an intersection, but before they could make their next move, the ground shook violently, and a deep rumbling sound reverberated through the station. The ceiling cracked again, this time splitting wide open as a dark mass, bigger than anything Riker had ever seen, came crashing down. The creature, the one they'd been running from, whipped around, its claws raised in a primal gesture of defiance. But even it seemed to hesitate. The mass continued to descend, debris falling in all directions, until what had been hidden for so long revealed itself. It was a giant, an enormous, hulking, tentacled monstrosity, its body a grotesque blend of alien anatomy and twisted human features. Its skin was leathery, scarred from the countless experiments that had been conducted on it, but there was no mistaking the power in its form. Its eyes, if you could call them that, were vast pools of liquid blackness that seemed to absorb all light, and the creature's mouth stretched impossibly wide, revealing rows of jagged teeth that glistened with hunger. The creature towered over them, its tentacles undulating and snapping with deadly precision. As it moved, the ground seemed to buckle beneath its weight, the entire corridor shaking with each step it took. Riker's pulse raced. This wasn't just an experiment gone wrong. This was the experiment, the culmination of everything the station had been working toward. And it was awake. Captain, Liana's voice was strained as she backed away. What the hell do we do now? We fight or we die, Riker growled, his mind working in overdrive. The thing before them was a nightmare, but it wasn't invincible. He had to believe that. Focus on the creature, no matter how many tentacles it has. If we can break its mobility, we might stand chance. The rest of the crew readied their weapons, but Riker could see the doubt in their eyes. No one had ever seen something like this before, not even in their wildest nightmares. But there was no turning back now. The tentacled monstrosity let out a guttural roar, a sound that reverberated through the hallways, shaking the very foundations of the station. Its tentacles lashed out, smashing against the walls and sending sparks flying. It was fast, too fast for something so large. "Everyone move," Riker shouted. "We need to break its concentration. Aim for its eyes, its weak spots." They opened fire, blasters and rifles, lighting up the dark corridor with bursts of energy. But the creature moved with unnatural speed, its massive body twisting and contorting in ways no living being should be able to. The blaster bolts ricocheted off its thick skin, leaving only the faintest scorch marks, but nothing substantial. Liana fired a round at one of its eyes. It screamed in pain, but the wound quickly healed over, regenerating at a frightening rate. Riker cursed under his breath. "We're going to need something heavier than blasters." Suddenly, a familiar voice crackled through their comms. "Captain, this is Kale." Lieutenant Kale's voice was tight with tension. "We've got a whole squad up top, but there's no way we can get to you through the lower levels. There's something down here, something we can't get through." "We've got it in sight," Riker grunted, ducking as a tentacle slammed into the ground near him, sending a shockwave through the floor. "But it's more than we can handle. You need to find a way to bring down the station's power grid. Shut it down, or this thing is going to wipe us out." Kale's voice was strained, but it carried a note of grim determination. "Understood. But be ready for anything. We'll do what we can on our end." "Good luck," Riker replied, as he turned to face the beast again. But as he did, something else caught his eye. Through the chaos and violence, through the flashes of gunfire, he saw the creature's tentacles shifting toward the far side of the corridor. It was focusing its attention on something or someone else. "Liana, look," Riker yelled. "It's not just attacking us. It's heading toward the research lab, the source of its power." Liana's face paled. "You're saying?" "It's after the core," Riker finished for her. "If it gets there, we're all dead. That's the heart of this station. If it destroys that, everything goes with it." They had to move, fast. Without a word, Riker charged forward, his team falling into step behind him. The creature screeched as it noticed their movement, its tentacles thrashing wildly. But they couldn't afford to hesitate. They were no longer fighting to survive. They were fighting to prevent an extinction-level catastrophe. The research core was only a few levels down, but the closer they got, the more the creature's presence seemed to distort the station. It was as if the entire station was fighting against them, the walls shifting and creaking under the strain of the creature's might. "Faster," Riker urged as they moved through the corridor at breakneck speed. And then, just ahead, they saw it. The research core, the heart of the station. A vast chamber lined with energy conduits, glowing with an unnatural light. But standing between them and the core was the creature, now fully aware of their intentions. It had no intention of letting them stop it. The final confrontation was about to begin. The research core chamber loomed before them, its heavy doors sealed shut with a force that almost seemed unnatural. Riker could feel the intensity in the air, like static before storm. Behind him, the creature, a writhing nightmare of tentacles and shifting flesh, was drawing closer, its guttural roars shaking the walls as it advanced with purpose. "We don't have much time," Liana shouted, her breath ragged as she sprinted ahead. "If it reaches the core, it won't just destroy the station, it'll destroy everything. The entire sector." Riker gritted his teeth and pushed harder, ignoring the pain in his legs as he led the charge. They couldn't let this monstrosity win. They couldn't let this twisted experiment spread beyond the station. "We need to get through that door," Riker ordered, his voice steady despite the growing panic in his chest. He raised his blaster, taking a few shots at the locked door's control panel, but the blasts barely dented the thick metal. Liana was already at the panel, her fingers flying over the terminal. "There's a secondary access point, but it's coded. We'll need a few minutes." "No time for that," Riker snapped, stepping back. He motioned for the crew to scatter. "Lay down suppressing fire. If we don't hold it off, we're done for." The creature was closer now, its massive form filling the corridor behind them. The floor trembled with each step it took, and Riker could hear the hiss of air as it inhaled, readying for another attack. Liana glanced up from the terminal, fear flashing in her eyes. "If I can't unlock the door in time." "We'll find a way through it," Riker interrupted, even as his heart raced. He turned, readying his weapon. "We'll do whatever it takes." The team opened fire, their shots echoing off the walls, but the creature barely reacted. Each tentacle slashed against the metal with a sickening whip sound, and the air seemed to warp with the energy that radiated from its body. The thing was faster than anything they had ever faced, an apex predator, not just in strength but in intelligence, honed by experiments that had twisted its very essence. Suddenly, a loud bang echoed through the chamber as one of the tentacles smashed into the wall, sending a wave of debris and sparks flying in all directions. The crew ducked, shielding their faces from the barrage of shrapnel. Riker barely had time to react, grabbing Liana by the arm and pulling her to the side as another tentacle slithered toward them. "Get that door open now," he roared. Liana's hands were shaking as she worked the terminal with desperation, sweat beading on her forehead. The screen blinked, a red light flashing as the access code was rejected for the third time. "I can't," she gasped. "It's a fail-safe. It's rejecting my override attempts." Riker's mind raced. "Then we'll have to breach it manually." He signaled to the crew to provide covering fire and moved toward the door's reinforced panel, inspecting the lock mechanisms. There was a small access port, but it was buried deep beneath layers of steel and energy shielding. He'd need to cut through it with one of the plasma tools from their packs, but that would take time. They didn't have time. The creature was nearly upon them. A horrific screech filled the chamber, and Riker spun to see the monstrosity rearing up, its massive mouth opening wide as a foul-smelling liquid dripped from its gaping maw. The creature's tentacles flailed in a frenzy, each one crashing into the walls, tearing through metal like paper. Riker's crew fired desperately, but their shots barely made an impact. The creature was nearly invulnerable to their weapons, and the more they shot, the more enraged it became. "Focus," Riker thought, a cold wave of clarity sweeping over him. He snapped open his plasma cutter, its bright blue light igniting. Without a word, he dove for the access panel, locking the cutter in place and beginning to slice through the door's outer defenses. The air crackled with the sound of plasma burning through steel, but it was slow work. Too slow. Suddenly, a series of loud whips sounded as the creature's tentacles struck. One of them slammed into the door near Riker, sending a shower of sparks and metal flying. A piece of shrapnel grazed his arm, leaving a burning streak of pain. Riker gritted his teeth and ignored it. His focus was singular: get the door open. Behind him, Liana and the rest of the crew continued to fire, but it was clear they were losing ground. The creature was closing in, its enormous bulk blocking the hallway and filling the space with an almost suffocating sense of dread. Then, without warning, the ground beneath their feet shuddered as something far more terrifying than even the creature appeared. A loud, guttural roar erupted from the depths of the station, so powerful that it reverberated in Riker's chest. The walls cracked, the lights flickered, and the entire corridor seemed to tremble. "What the hell is that?" one of the crew shouted. Liana's eyes widened in horror as she stared toward the corridor beyond the creature. "That's not the creature we were fighting. Something's coming. Something worse." Riker's heart sank as the room seemed to grow darker. The air shifted, becoming dense with energy, as the creature's attention diverted to the new arrival. The massive tentacled monster let out a roar, louder than anything Riker had heard before, as though it was calling out to the new presence, beckoning it. And then it appeared. It was massive, even by the creature's standards, a shadowed figure materializing from the flickering emergency lights. Its body was armored, its movement slow but purposeful, as though the creature had evolved again, its very form transforming before their eyes into something far more terrifying. It wasn't just a hybrid. It was an evolution of everything the station had unleashed. Riker's mind raced. The creature in front of him, this monster, wasn't just a failed experiment. It was a new breed of nightmare, and it was now the least of their problems. We need to destroy the core now. Riker yelled, his voice full of urgency and terror. But the room was closing in on them, and the true horror was just beginning. The air was thick with tension, the temperature rising as the new monstrosity, an armored, grotesque version of the previous creature, towered before them. Its sheer size made the original hybrid look like a mere child, and its presence seemed to warp the very fabric of the station. It moved slowly, deliberately, but there was an undeniable menace in every step it took. The walls creaked and groaned, as if they too were afraid of the monstrosity's approach. Riker could feel the hairs on the back of his neck stand on end. There was no longer any question about what this thing was. It was the culmination of every twisted experiment, every failure, every nightmare that had been unleashed on this station. The creature was evolving, and with every step, it was growing more and more unstoppable. Liana's voice broke through his thoughts. Riker, we're running out of time. The core's stability is dropping. If it reaches critical mass, we're done for, even if we kill the creature. I know, Riker gritted out, his eyes darting between the creature and the control panel. He was almost through. The door was nearly cut open, but the momentary lapse in focus almost cost them everything. One of the creature's massive tentacles slammed into the wall beside him, narrowly missing him as it sent a shockwave through the room. A growl rumbled from deep within the creature's throat, low and menacing. Riker's heart pounded in his chest. They were out of time. With a final deafening clash, the plasma cutter finished its work, the thick door panel falling away in a cloud of sparks and metal shards. Riker didn't wait for anyone to speak. He sprinted into the core chamber, his pulse racing. Liana and the rest of the crew followed, though not without hesitation. They were all fully aware that what lay ahead was not just a fight for survival, but for the future of the sector itself. The research core chamber was vast, its dark, metallic walls reflecting the dim emergency lights that flickered overhead. The center of the room was dominated by a large cylindrical structure, the core itself, pulsating with a bright, otherworldly glow. "What the hell is that?" one of the crew members asked, staring at the core in awe and terror. The energy readings from it were off the charts, fluctuating wildly. It was unstable, and it was their only hope. Riker stepped forward, eyes locked on the structure. "That's our target. If we destroy it, we stop the creature. We stop all of this." "How do we destroy it?" Liana asked, her voice tight with fear. "We overload it. Detonate the core," Riker said, already pulling out a series of explosive charges from his pack. "We have one shot at this. Once we activate it, there's no going back. The blast will take out everything, the creature, the station, and anything else within range. It'll be a cleansing fire. Are you sure?" Liana's voice faltered as she looked from Riker to the core. She knew the stakes. Riker didn't answer. Instead, he moved quickly, securing the charges to the core's power conduits. The station groaned again, a low, ominous sound as if it were coming to life, reacting to their presence. But Riker had no choice. He had to trust that the plan would work. Behind him, the creature let out a deafening roar. The ground trembled beneath their feet as it surged forward, its massive tentacles crashing against the walls. The new abomination was closing in fast. "Start the countdown, Liana," Riker ordered, his voice unwavering despite the adrenaline surging through his veins. Liana nodded, her fingers flying over her terminal. 15 seconds. "I'm triggering the failsafe." Riker's mind was already racing through the steps. The creature was almost upon them. The air was thick with heat and tension. He could hear its steps growing louder, feel the vibrations from the walls shaking under its weight. It was too close, too fast. The creature's tentacles lashed out, smashing into the walls and sending sparks flying in all directions. Riker ducked, narrowly avoiding a blow that would have pulverized him. The creature was furious, its mind focused entirely on eliminating them. They were no longer the hunters. Now they were the prey. "We're almost there." Liana's voice was sharp, but there was an edge of fear in it. "The core is almost primed to overload." Riker glanced at her, his voice steely. "Then get the hell out of here. Now." "No way," she replied, shaking her head. "We're in this together, Captain." Riker didn't argue. There was no time. The station was crumbling around them, and the creature was getting closer with every passing second. He turned his attention back to the core, adjusting the final charges. The energy readings were spiking every second. The core grew more unstable, but that was the point. If they wanted to stop the creature, this was the only way. The creature shrieked again, sending out a shockwave of force that rattled the walls. It was here, right on top of them. Its glowing eyes locked onto Riker, and for a moment it seemed like time itself froze. Then, the countdown hit 0. There was a deafening roar of energy as the core's energy chambers overloaded, a wave of blinding light sweeping through the room. The ground cracked open, and the entire station seemed to shudder as if it were alive. The blast pulse spread outward, a shock wave that destroyed everything in its path. For a brief moment, it felt like the world had ceased to exist, as if Riker were suspended in time, surrounded by a white, all-consuming light. He felt his body slam against the ground as the force of the blast hit, his world spinning as everything he knew crumbled around him. And then, the darkness claimed him. When Riker regained consciousness, it was as if he were waking from a dream. The world around him was quiet, eerily so. The air was thick, heavy with the remnants of the blast, but it was still. The sounds of the creature, the station, the chaos, were gone. There was no rumbling, no screams, no growls. It was as if the world had ended. He forced himself up, his body aching from the impact, his vision blurry. Slowly, the details of the room began to come back into focus. And then he saw the wreckage, the twisted remains of the creature, the shattered pieces of the core still smoldering, but no longer alive with energy. They had done it. But at what cost? Liana, bleeding from a cut across her cheek, was the first to speak. "Riker, we survived." "Not just us," Riker muttered, his voice hoarse. He turned, his gaze falling on the shattered remains of the station. "The sector's safe. For now." But Riker knew better than anyone. This wasn't over. There was always more to the story. Always another secret buried beneath the surface. And he would be ready when the next storm came. "You said." The wreckage of the research station stretched out before Riker like a graveyard. Twisted metal and collapsed walls crumpled in on themselves. The remnants of a once proud scientific facility, now reduced to nothing more than smoldering ruins. The stars beyond the shattered viewport were eerily quiet, unbothered by the destruction that had just taken place within the station's walls. Riker's body ached from a blast, his head still pounding from the shockwave. He pushed himself up from the debris, the weight of exhaustion dragging at his limbs. The mission had been a success, but it had come at a tremendous cost. The core had been destroyed, the creature vanquished, and the station's main reactor had been overloaded, ensuring that the threat was neutralized. But the true toll, the lives lost, the friendships shattered, could never truly be measured. Liana was already moving among the wreckage, helping the others who had survived, offering a comforting word where she could, though even her voice was strained with grief. The rest of the crew were either too injured or too mentally scarred to speak. Riker could feel the silence hanging heavy, an unspoken understanding among them all that their victory had come at the expense of so much more. As Riker walked toward the remains of the control center, he couldn't help but reflect on how far they had come, or perhaps how far they had fallen. The doors that had once been sealed to keep the creature in, to prevent the horrors from escaping, were now nothing more than twisted scraps of metal. He found himself staring at the wreckage for a long moment, his mind replaying the fight, the desperation, and the final moments of the creature as it had been obliterated by the core's energy surge. For a moment he almost wished he could have saved it meaning not the creature, but the station itself, the people who had been part of this mission. There had been real lives here once, scientists, explorers, and dreamers. All now lost. The betrayal, the deception that had led to the creation of the creature, had tainted everything. Riker, Liana's voice broke through his reverie. "We're alive. We did it." He turned to her, offering a grim smile. "We did. But at what price?" His gaze swept over the crew who had gathered at the makeshift command center, all of them battered and broken in their own ways. Is it really over? What we destroyed here wasn't just the creature, it was the heart of what they were trying to create. And who knows what else they were hiding in this damn station. Liana sighed, her shoulders sagging under the weight of it all. We'll never know. The records were all wiped. But we stopped them. The creature's dead. The core's gone. We have time now, Riker. Time to rebuild, to figure out what's next. What's next? Riker echoed. I don't know if I'll ever be able to shake the feeling that we're just a few steps ahead of something worse. They were experimenting here, Liana, on something that shouldn't have ever been born. The question isn't whether we survived. The real question is whether this is over, or if this place just changed the game, made something worse than we ever imagined. She met his gaze, her expression hardening. You really think there's more out there? More experiments, more creatures? Riker paused, then nodded slowly. I've seen enough to know that humanity's thirst for power and knowledge doesn't end. They might have wiped the slate clean here, but there's always more to be found, always more to be created. And if we leave it unchecked, then we're doing their job for them, she finished, her voice quiet but resolute. The gravity of what had transpired over the past few days finally seemed to hit him. They weren't the same people who had walked into that station. They couldn't be. The horrors they had faced, the lives they had sacrificed to bring an end to this nightmare, would follow them long after they escaped the station's doomed shell. As Riker looked back at the station's crumbling ruins, something flickered in his mind, a fleeting vision of the creature, still writhing in its final moments before the core's destruction. Its eyes had held intelligence, desperation, and perhaps even a glimmer of awareness, as if it understood that it wasn't just an experiment, but a victim of something far greater. The thoughts swirled in his mind, dark and heavy. They had ended the immediate threat, but something told him this wasn't the end of their story. There would be more. It would find them. It always did. Liana broke the silence. I know what you're thinking. And you're right. This isn't over. There are always more. Riker looked at her, his expression weary, but firm. We have to keep going. Not for glory, not for fame, but because what we saw here, what we survived, could be the start of something worse. We can't let it continue. And we won't, she said with a nod. We'll make sure the truth gets out. Let everyone know what happened here. The galaxy needs to know. Riker looked back toward the wreckage of the research station. The silence that followed was deafening. They had ended a nightmare, yes. But in doing so, they had uncovered just how fragile the line between life and death really was. And the galaxy, for all its vastness, was a place that had far too many dark corners, far too many secrets that humanity might never be ready to face. Let's get out of here, Riker said finally, his voice filled with a quiet determination. We've got work to do. As they made their way to the extraction point, Riker couldn't shake the feeling that the real battle was still ahead. The creature was dead. The station was gone. But the truth was out there, lurking in the shadows, waiting to resurface when they least expected it. And when it did, they would be ready.